So we've seen that server-side controls retain their state across postbacks, and there are a couple implications to this. One is there's no need to reinitialize state in controls when you are processing postback requests. So if you're doing something on every single load event of a page and you're going back and grabbing data from a database or calling a web service or something, if you're taking that data and putting it into controls, there's no need to do that data retrieval on a postback, on a subsequent postback to the page, because the state is implicitly going to be retained for you across post requests. One other side effect of this is that you can't quite do cross-page posting like you might be used to in other environments in ASP.NET. Now there is support for cross-page posting, as we'll see later when we get to the state management discussion, but by default you can't just set the action of the form and expect that to work like it used to, because ASP.NET sort of takes control over that postback process and doesn't support the standard action setting that you might be used to. So we'll talk later about how to actually do cross-page posting if that's something you still want to do. One other quick note, and we're going to jump into this in much more detail in a moment, is that controls that are not intrinsically part of the postback, in part of the post body, the request, will still have their state retained, but it's through this other mechanism called viewState. So if they're not an input control, say just a standard label, that will have its state retained via the hidden viewState mechanism. So let's go ahead and take a look at the implications of state management here. And what I thought I would do is go back to our page that we looked at earlier, where we had a bulleted list that was being data bound, and we had a label and a calendar, and we had a button down below for performing a calculation. So what I want to do is take a look at the logic in our code behind class here and sort of identify logic that may be unnecessary or maybe being performed unnecessarily because the state is already retained in a postback. So the obvious place to look for this stuff is in the load event handler. And in this particular case, we're doing a manual data bind on the display list. And this is a good example of something that doesn't have to be done on postback requests, because the display list is going to have cached that data in its view state. Same thing with this location H3 that will also have cached in its server-side state. And same thing with this item count label. All of these things will have their state retained across postbacks. So one thing I can do to sort of optimize this is if we're not in a postback, which I can check by querying the isPostback property of the page, then we do the initialization. Otherwise, don't bother. Right? There's no reason to perform all of this state initialization on these controls if you're in the middle of a postback, because that state will have been retained from the previous values that were set in the initial get processing. So let's go ahead and try that just to make sure everything behaves as expected. So that was the initial get request, and everything looks good. Our items are complete. Our H3 is printing the right location, and the total number of items is printed properly down here. And let's go try doing a postback, which we know this add numbers button will do. And notice that this still has the location value, the items are still populated correctly, and the total item count is still correct as well. So all of that happened even though I didn't bother resetting the values as part of the post request. So keep that in mind as you're working with your pages, that you may be able to make some optimizations by leveraging the fact that the controls will keep their state across posts back to the same page.